You've heard a certain Foxu waifu of ours, that is been going on against about DEI and especially a little something called bridge. Well, something new here in today on I believe this is a Substack by Colin Wright. Groundbreaking study on DEI. It was silenced. Two leading media organizations abruptly shelved coverage of a groundbreaking study that went totally against the narrative. Well, imagine my shock. Force the dark page, that way we're not getting flashbanged here. But from reality's last stand, in a stunning series of events, two leading media organizations, the New York Times and Bloomberg, abruptly shelved coverage of a groundbreaking study that raises serious concerns about the psychological impacts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, pedagogy, otherwise known as DEI. The study, conducted by the Network Contagion Research Institute in collaboration with Rutgers University, found that certain DEI practices could induce hostility, increase authoritarian tendencies, and foster agreement with extreme rhetoric. With billions of dollars invested annually in these initiatives, the public has a right to know if such programs, heralded as effective model solutions to bigotry and hate, might instead be fueling the very problems they claim to solve. The decision to withhold coverage raises serious questions about transparency, editorial independence, and the growing influence of ideological biases in the media. The NCRI study investigated the psychological effects of DEI pedagogy, specifically training programs that draw heavily from texts like Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist and Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility. The findings were unsettling, though perhaps not surprising to long-standing opponents of such programs. Nothing really surprises me anymore. Though carefully controlled experiments, the researchers demonstrated that exposure to anti-oppressive, in other words, anti-racist rhetoric, common in many DEI initiatives, consistently amplified perceptions of bias where none existed at all. Participants were more likely to see prejudice in neutral scenarios and to support punitive actions against imagined offenders. These effects were not marginal. Hostility and punitive tendencies increased by double-digit percentages across multiple measures. Perhaps most troubling, the study revealed a chilling convergence with authoritarian attitudes, suggesting that such training is fostering not empathy, but coercion and control. No, you don't say. The implications of these findings cannot be downplayed. DEI programs have become a fixture in workplaces, schools, and universities across the United States, with a 2023 Pew Research Center report indicating more than half of U.S. workers have attended some form of DEI training. Institutions collectively spend approximately $8 billion annually on these initiatives, and yet the NCRI study underscores how little scrutiny they receive. While proponents of DEI argue that these programs are essential to achieving equity and dismantling systemic oppression, the NCRI's data suggests that such efforts may actually be deepening divisions and cultivating hostility. This context makes the suppression of the study even more alarming. The New York Times, which has cited NCRI's work in nearly 20 previous articles, suddenly demanded that this particular research undergo peer review, a requirement that has never once been imposed on the Institute's earlier findings, even on similarly sensitive topics like extremism or online hate. Funny how that works. They'll just accept anything that does go with their narrative without question. But the minute something comes up that questions that, oh no, we've got to peer review this, we've got to fact-check this to hell and back. At Bloomberg, the story was quashed outright by an editor known for public support of DEI initiatives. Can't have them looking embarrassed now, can we? The editorial decisions were ostensibly justified as routine discretion, and yet they align conspicuously with the ideological leanings of those involved. Are these major outlets succumbing to pressures to protect certain narratives at the expense of truth? Well, yes, of course they are. Having worked in radio and in journalism myself for many years, I can tell you this goes on all the time. If it does not fit the narrative, you will find your stories quietly just sort of disappearing, or, oh, well, we don't have time to cover that, or no, we need you to go cover this other thing. Just sort of shuffle it under the rug and forget about it. For Joel Finkelstein, the NCRI researcher leading the study, the editorial reversals are as revealing as the data itself. In communications with reporters, he described the findings as sobering, with likely impact for DEI policy, as well as congressional impacts and potentially civil litigation. There honestly does need to be civil litigation. I think that and only that would probably bring an end to this monstrosity once and for all. And even then it would probably find some way to come back in some form or fashion. It's like this terrible case of athlete's foot. You just can't get rid of it. Or like a really bad STD. Finkelstein further stated that this seems like an effort to suppress research that challenges prevailing narratives around DEI and worryingly implicates standard practices but egregious harms. It seems like? No, it is. The harm in question goes far beyond the scope of individual programs. Across multiple experiments, the study documented a consistent pattern. Exposure to anti-oppressive DEI rhetoric heightened participants' tendency to attribute hostility and bias to ambiguous situations. In their effort to be anti-oppressive, they start to feel oppressed, even though they're not. And they see hostility and bias where none really exists. So, is this really fixing a problem? Or is this just a racket that's trying to stir up more trouble so they can make more money? In one experiment, participants read excerpts from Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi, juxtaposed against a neutral control text about corn production. Afterward, they were asked to evaluate a hypothetical scenario, an applicant being rejected from an elite university. Those exposed to the DEI materials were far more likely to perceive racism in the admissions process, despite no evidence to support such a conclusion. They were also more likely to advocate punitive measures, such as suspending the admissions officer or mandating additional DEI training. Oh, is that all? Thought they would be calling for their summary execution. A particularly revealing aspect of the study focused on DEI training centered on Islamophobia, using materials developed by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. The findings echoed the broader concerns of the study, but offered unique insights into how DEI programming shapes perceptions of bias and fairness. Participants were presented with a scenario involving two fictional individuals, Ahmed Akhtar and George Green, both convicted of identical terrorism charges. When participants were exposed to the ISPU-inspired training materials, their perception of Ahmed's trial was significantly altered. They rated it as far less fair than George's, despite the trials being described in identical terms. This discrepancy highlights a core issue with DEI narratives that emphasize systemic oppression. By priming participants to see injustice against specific groups, these trainings appear to cultivate a hostile attribution bias, a tendency to perceive prejudice and discrimination even where none exists. While sensitivity to genuine bias is critical, the NCRI findings suggest that DEI interventions like the ISPU materials may create unwarranted distrust in institutions and undermine confidence in objective fairness. Another alarming aspect of the NCRI study involved DEI training on caste discrimination. Participants exposed to materials from Equality Labs, a prominent provider of anti-caste training, were significantly more likely to perceive bias and endorse dehumanizing rhetoric, including adapted quotes from Adolf Hitler where the term Jew was replaced with Brahmin. The findings suggest that these programs may not only fail to address systemic injustice, but actively cultivate divisive and authoritarian mindsets. So they pour kerosene on the fire. Critics of DEI have long pointed to its lack of empirical support, and the NCRI study adds weight to those concerns. Research cited in the report highlights how many DEI programs rely on untested theories or unverified self-reports, with little oversight or accountability. A 2021 meta-analysis found that some initiatives not only fail to reduce prejudice, but actually exacerbate it, fueling resentment and perceptions of unfairness. The NCRI study's findings echo these conclusions, suggesting that far from fostering inclusion, DEI programs may perpetuate a cycle of suspicion and punitive retribution. In other words, it's just one long series of vendettas, one against the other. Yet as troubling as the study's findings are, its suppression may be even more consequential. The decision to withhold this research from public discourse speaks to a larger issue, the growing entanglement of ideology and information. In a moment when public trust in institutions is already fragile, I would say practically non-existent at this point, the media's role as a gatekeeper of information becomes all the more worrying. When powerful outlets like the New York Times and Bloomberg withhold stories of such significance, they fracture trust with the American people. The public deserves to know if the tools being deployed to foster equity and anti-racism are instead causing harm. They are. The NCRI study raises urgent questions about the real social consequences of DEI programming, but it also underscores the need for transparency and accountability in how we address these issues. Suppressing this research does not further the goal of making society more inclusive and accepting. If anything, it undermines it. As DEI programs continue to expand across schools, workplaces, governments, the stakes could not be higher. Whether this research sparks a broader reckoning or remains buried will depend on whether institutions and the media that hold them accountable are willing to confront uncomfortable truths. It's a conversation that we all need to have. We really need to have it. But the measures that have been undertaken, not just since 2020, 2016, but I would dare say since 2012 or even as early as 2008, answering that question of whether they've done more harm than good, I think they have. I really think they have. And so it's, yeah, but we need to have that conversation. And there's a lot of people out there that need to have that come to Jesus moment. That not everything is racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, or any other type of ism of phobic that you can think of. If anything, the past few months we've seen a repudiation of that sort of attitude and these sorts of things. This has got to go. DEI is making things miserable for other people. And it's just making everything worse. If you are constantly in fear of losing your job over some perceived slight against a person who is a minority, then I would dare say you cannot do your job effectively, nor can you do it as efficiently. We deserve, and I would dare say we all have a right to go into workplaces, into our respective workplaces, and be able to do our job without fuss. As a certain Great Western engine would once say. We deserve to be able to go in and do our jobs without fuss. And without fear of losing our livelihoods just because of a mere misunderstanding, or someone taking something that we say the wrong way, or taking something that we do the wrong way, or even just straight up making up out of whole cloth accusations that are completely and totally without merit. We have put up with enough of this nonsense, and it's time for it to end. And it's time for a lot of people to just grow the fuck up. thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you never miss an update. If you have any thoughts, questions, or ideas for future videos, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. You can also follow me on Twitter @LordRexworth for more updates and behind-the-scenes content. And if you want to support the channel, check out my Ko-fi or Throne pages. Links are in the description. Finally, be sure to visit lordrexworth.com and follow me across all platforms. That's lordrexworth.com. Until next time, I wish you all the best, and God bless.